Hi, this is DJ Trishler of Trishler Design Co. And this is Process Out Loud, where I unpack brand identity processes that I've worked on, that my company's worked on. And this is actually the first of hopefully many. I'm considering this a beta test, so I welcome any and all feedback. In this first installment, I'm going to unpack the Indigo Hippo identity refresh. It's a refresh because there was already an existing identity that we worked from and built upon. So with that, I'm going to go into the discovery presentation, which is the first of three presentations I give. I give these three presentations as kind of check-ins to sign off on each step of the identity process. I should say that I work towards one final solution. I don't present three solutions for the client to vote on. I present one solution that the client hopefully loves, and these three presentations that I give, discovery, design direction, and reveal, are ways of collaborating with the client and working toward a solution that we all believe is the most powerful solution for the project. So with that, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to go quick. Please feel free to pause and read any of the presentations. But yeah, I just want to give an overview here. Hopefully you enjoy. So first off, I start with a creative brief. In this case, I did one-on-one interviews to answer these questions. Nowadays, I do a workshop that answers questions similar to this. And in this case, I interviewed team members, funders, and community members or customers of Indigo Hippo. Nowadays, I would have brought all of them into the same room versus doing phone calls or one-on-one interviews. I would have brought them all into the same room, and I facilitate this kind of discovery workshop with them and get all the same information in a much quicker way. But still, this is very helpful one-on-one interviews, workshops, whichever way. It's still good information. So we start out with the purpose of the project, and we gathered these 3 points here. Feel free again to pause and review. Then we go through the audience. It's important that we know who we're communicating to. We walk through the voice when we do communicate. How do we communicate? What does it sound like to people? Then we talk about the personality, or I guess you could say the environment or atmosphere of Indigo Hippo. These 4 points need to be considered as we move along. How does the audience feel when interacting with Indigo Hippo? These 4 points here are gathered from our interviews, and they're not just made up, but these are points and feelings that we want to continue to generate, whether it's in person or through the brand identity. What impact do we have on the audience? Very important question to understand what we're trying to achieve here. So we had these 2 ideas of connection to true self and artists don't starve, everyone has access. It's worth noting that in the heart of Indigo Hippo is this idea of helping those who are experiencing mental or emotional health issues. That's in the DNA of Indigo Hippo, and so you'll see that pop up a lot through these slides and in future presentations. Here's the message, whether it's visual or verbal. We want to be communicating these 3 points. Arts plus community equals support, customized, high quality, and connection, and the arts for everyone. Context where the identity will exist. Standards for success. It's important to have targets. We want to have something to test our identity, our final solution against, and these were the points that we came up with together. Now the big idea really sums up everything that we have just covered, and in the case of the big idea, I should say that it's 1 to 5 words that sum up an understanding of the core identity. The words are not supposed to be necessarily external, but they do influence the brand identity direction. In the case of Indigo Hippo, was this idea of we're all hippos. We wanted to say and had to restrain ourselves from saying we all have issues. We all have mental and emotional health issues. While that's true, probably true, it's not really a friendly invitation this idea of a hippo, it's a beautiful and weird being. You might not know this, but hippos can't swim. They're a little clumsy, but they're strong and powerful. And so that really encompasses, I think, our audience, us. We're these beautiful yet clumsy, imperfect beings. But the word we're all, and words we're all in the beginning imply community and connection and empathy and ownership, all things that we really wanted to communicate for Indigo Hippo through Indigo Hippo. So this is a big idea. They loved it. We loved it. And you'll see how that plays out in future presentations. This is really where the design direction or not design direction, but the reveal presentation ends. We get feedback and we move towards design direction. After the reveal presentation, we move on to design direction, which is kind of one client once called it a temperature check, where we reveal pieces of the identity. Anne Lamott, one of my favorite writers, talks about you have to get through the shitty first drafts. And I think in design that's true as well. And so I don't know how I feel about it, but I think that in a lot of ways the design direction is showing the client some shitty first drafts. Another way to put it is, here's a hunch of where we think the direction should go. In every design direction presentation, we get really critical, good feedback. And you'll see in the reveal that it's dramatically different. But we have to get through this phase and get feedback, allow the client to participate and give their input to get to where we need to go, which is one good, powerful solution. And so with that preface in place, I'm going to dive into this. Again, feel free to pause and glance and read as you wish. So we always start out with a recap and we go back over the standards of success, the big idea, again, reconnecting to this at all times. From the last time we presented, we've started to dive into visuals. So here's the logo workshop results. These are some of the logos that the client really loved. Logo workshop is this thing I do where I just throw hundreds of already created logos out there. Logos that relate to the company, like hippos, or the Unnatural Society, which is one of David Egger's 826 projects, similar to the storefront that Indigo Hippo has. Wisemaker is another art supply or adaptive reuse store. And then these, I guess you could call them dynamic identities that where there's something that always changes, the image or the mark, but there's something that always stays the same. And I had a hunch that we might move in that direction. So I show them all these logos as a way of saying, here's what's already been created. We don't want to recreate these, but where can we pull from? So I always start with historic inspiration. Sherlock Holmes studied historic crime cases because things tend to repeat themselves. I think Picasso said that great artists steal, and so we steal from other designers that have gone before us, typically not contemporary designers, but designers of the past, where they've solved similar problems, worked on similar cases, if you will. In this case, we came up with this idea of tribal contemporary style, where we're combining the idea of tribal, the group, the hippo, the bloats, that's a group of hippos. It points to more of a hand-rendered idea or style, more of a, I guess, hippos being from Africa, more of an indigenous look, rough, emotive maybe, but then contemporary, which connects to the idea of maybe a little clean, modern, not too messy, but messy still. So this is where we started, and to show what that looks like, we pulled from prehistoric art, the caves of Lascaux, the original graphic designers, people who are making hieroglyphics and cuneiform characters, going back to that hand-rendered, non-digital style. Paul Rand, of course, one of our heroes, who was kind of mid-century modernist, but he had this playful hand-cut paper hand-rendered type matched with a contemporary mark or modern mark like the Westinghouse logo. A good person to look after how he created things for inspiration. And then, of course, as I mentioned already, dynamic identities. Moving on, we wanted to show them some typography. We, in this case, were considering kind of a mid-century style using Clarendon and moving towards a stencil and then a digital hand-rendered look. We went way different in the final reveal, but this was our hunch. We used some pieces here, but we did end up going very differently. And then form, again, we went in a very different direction than this, but pay attention to that half circle, the flying taco, if you will. I think that becomes the real motif, but this was a little too childlike, I think, but it was a start. It was a shitty first draft. You can see our flying taco a little more there, but that becomes the motif. We got some really critical feedback from the client here. It was positive, constructive, but this isn't the right direction, obviously, but it was, or I shouldn't say it wasn't the right direction, but it wasn't the right formation, but it was good, solid step, and you could see our hunch with that half circle, which pops up in the reveal. So we got some good feedback, and we move forward. The feedback moved us forward. So next up, we'll move into the reveal presentation. For our final presentation, is the reveal, where we combine that of the discovery and the design direction into the final identity. Now, there may still be some little feedback points that we get from the client after this presentation, but this really sums up and finalizes the project. Again, we present one solution, and we work towards that solution through these 3 presentations. Now we go through a pretty high overview recap of the design discovery process and going through the message, personality. Again, we want to make sure that everything we create is intentional and goes back to these points that were critical to the process. And you'll see that we've changed things quite a bit moving forward from the design direction, but remember that the design direction was just a hunch. So we start with the logo type. We got some good feedback there. They weren't too fond of that Clarendon as the primary typeface. So we went back to the original logo that Indigo Hippo had before they came to us, which was this kind of watercolor pen and ink logo, and we tried to find a typeface that really was similar but was a digital variation that would be easier to use, easier to replicate, and that stood out. And so we have this fun typeface here, Paralucent, or Paraclucent, I think, or Paralucent, if I recall correctly. We use both a condensed and a regular variation, which was kind of fun and quirky and maybe broke a little bit of rules, but again, you can see how this is a direct correlation from their original logo. You can see how it works at all sizes and different variations, and as it stands out in the world of social enterprise and nonprofit here in Cincinnati. You could add a watercolor behind it if you like. Here's it with some of the weird, cool things that Indigo Hippo was using before we came into the process. This is from their original identity. It's a good transition point for them moving forward. Now let's talk about the brand architecture, and this is really moving into the different programs that they have. The creative arts programming, which is where they go out and teach arts to different community organizations, and then the art supply thrift store. You know that as their storefront in Over the Rhine on Main Street. And so we created this system that they could use where they could distinguish, which was one of our goals, the different formations of Indigo Hippo. And you could see how that would start to look on a brochure, using some of the design elements they've had in the past. You could start to see how it would look in the storefront too. And you'll notice we're using a hand-rendered typeface here, but this is actually using an alphabet that their team created, and we had them create on their own using their own their own unique hand-rendered typeface. So now the form, remember that flying taco that I mentioned in the design direction presentation. We kept going back to that, and hopefully I'll include some sketches too on the side here in the blog entry as well. But we went back to this as like, that's a hippo. If you think about it, it's a hippo underwater with its back to you. You add a bottom to it, that's a hippo, maybe without legs, without facing you. But then you add its feet, you add its face, and that's a hippo. That's a hippo on its side looking toward you. That's a hippo with its butt to you. That's a hippo on its side with its butt to you. That's a hippo on its side and a hippo with its mouth open. And you can kind of go back through it, and it moves, it shakes, it's kind of cool and fun. There's where we move into this idea of a dynamic identity where there's multiple variations, both outline and non-outline versions. You can see different forms of the logo with different forms of the mark, if you will, of the hippo. And here it is in application on business cards. Again, we wanted something that had that kind of DIY feel to it, using a craft paper, watercolors. The logo could be a stamp eventually. Here's some postcards on Instagram, and a brochure, in-store usage, posters and tags. The storefront, this is not their storefront, but a mock-up of what that could look like. We had these buttons, and on the right you can see I worked here with Joe Walsh of Joe Walsh Design, and he came up with some really fun illustrations using different mediums that you could find, or media that you could find in the storefront, because Indigo Hippo has tons of different like crayons and markers, and we even created a kind of a moving GIF that showed the hippo in all these different mixed media. So it was a lot of fun. Tote bags, of course. So it's this logo that can be stamped, it could be printed, it can be drawn, it could be painted, and it's based off of the half circle, so anybody could really do it. It's so simple, like we said, that a fourth grader could use it. And so this is what they accepted as their final identity. We celebrated over gelato, and it was a really fun project to work on. So now you've seen the full process. There's been some tweaks that have happened since then, but really this was a process to work towards one solution, and we're really proud of this mark, and so is Indigo Hippo and their team, and really look forward to seeing it in use for years and years and years and years to come. So I hope you enjoyed this process. Please share any feedback you have. I know this was probably a little longer, and we'll work towards even more abridged versions of Process Out Loud in the future. Thank you.